I'm here on behalf of Dean Robert Shea, who could not be here. He hopes to join us a little bit later this afternoon. But I'm here to just welcome everybody to campus. Many of you were here last night to hear one of the many facets of the remarkable life and career of George Lynn. Last night we heard chamber music and solo vocal music. More people, I think, tend to know his choral music, so this was a wonderful kind of surprise, and also gives you an idea of the treasure trove of things in the American Music Research Center. The AMRC organizes special events like this every year or so, and it occurred to me as we start this part of the George Lynn celebration, we've already wandered into his world as a composer, and I hope you'll read in the green program book all of the helpful biographies and program notes and so forth to find out more about him. Today we're celebrating his very significant legacy as a teacher. Several of the people you will hear speaking today will help you understand the great legacy he left as a teacher. AMRC has actually done a great service to this particular topic several times. One of the greatest teachers of music in the 20th century, Nadia Boulanger, had a conference devoted to her in 2004. A few years before that, we did a special celebration of Ross Lee Finney, and I think this was 1998. He had passed away shortly before that meeting. Finney taught for many years at University of Michigan and established the first doctoral program in composition. The composer who I researched, George Crumb, studied with Finney and also started his teaching career here at CU Boulder from 1959 to 64. So all of the years of working on these topics has reinforced for me something probably all of us know as musicians, what a life-changing thing it is to work with a master teacher. And we're going to hear about one of those master teachers today from a lot of people who knew him and worked very closely with him. So it's really an honor to be here to meet all of you, hear your thoughts about George Lynn's career, and I think we're in for an amazing afternoon. Before we start, I wanted to thank Christina Lynn Craig once again for helping all of this happen. Also, the AMRC board, Carol Cassoy, the president of the board, is here along with a number of other board members. Eric Hansen, who does work around the clock when these things happen, also has been hugely helpful. And Barbara Britton is sitting right behind you. Anyway, before I take up any more time, I want to welcome Tom Reese up here. Tom has been the director of the AMRC since 1992, I think. And so he'll tell you a little more about what we have planned, and then we'll get started. So Tom Reese.
Thanks, Steve. We want to stay right on schedule. I'm not going to give any long speeches. I just wanted to, again, thank Steve and thank the main office for the support of this whole venture and all of the names that have been mentioned. If you did get to the concert last night, you know what amazingly wonderful, interesting music George Lynn wrote. But as Steve said, what we're going to be doing today is talking about different specific facets. We have, let me see, make sure I'm not forgetting anything. Referencing, though, the point that I've been here for 23 years. Yeah, I think it was 23 years ago this very month that I interviewed George Crumb, and that was a huge opportunity for me. I remember one of the first voices I heard after I was hired for my job was, "My name is Steve Bruns, and I'm calling from Boulder. Would you be interested in participating in our George Crumb Festival next October?" So, oh, of course. I'm going to turn that down. So we have another George today. We have three people to talk about them. You can read the biographies of Anna Wheeler Gentry, Erie Advisor, and Tina Lynn Craig in our booklet, and more about George Crumb. But without further ado, I will simply say our first speaker this afternoon is Anna Wheeler Gentry. Yes, you will. Yeah, this is very good.
So I'm going to be kind of multi-limbed here. Is there, Liz, do I need to do something to
projected up there?
It'll happen.
It's on.
Where are the entrance?
Well, some of you may be wondering who I am, why I'm here. I studied during my undergraduate years with Dr. George Lynn at Loretto Heights College in Denver. I was in his mixed choir for 4 years. I took choral conducting, choral arranging classes, got a number of solos, studied voice with him, and also the first student that I met in theory class, freshman year, was Tina, Dr. Lynn's daughter. So I hung out at their house, played with the Dalmatians, laughed with Tina a lot, occasionally launched into a Pennsylvania Dutch accent. And Dr. Lynn often referred to me as his little Dutch girl. You see, I was born about 60 miles from where Dr. Lynn was born in the coal regions of northeastern Pennsylvania. I would like to now share with you some things that might bring a better understanding of his life lived in music. In the 1966-67 Community Concert Association program for the Westminster Choir, there appeared a very significant sentence. Quote, George Lynn's career as a conductor has been divided between academic and church fields, with an emphasis on music composition. And while Dr. Lynn taught organists, pianists, singers, and conductors, and prepared great choral works for churches, universities, and professional venues throughout his life, for him, music composition consistently remained at the forefront. Therefore, I've chosen to highlight and elaborate on people who inspired or commissioned him for various works, and the places and events that influenced his writing. Nearly every aspect of George Lynn's life was filled with music. As a youngster, his mother sang Swedish folk songs to him, and his siblings as well, although he was a great deal younger than his 7 brothers and sisters. His piano studies began at the age of 7, followed by his first job as a church organist at the age of 12, then moonlighting as a teenager as a stand-up bass player in a dance band to help earn money for college. However, when he heard the Westminster Choir on one of their performance tours with John Finley Williamson conducting, he was drawn to this kind of music making. And he immediately transferred from Mansfield State Teachers College in Pennsylvania to Westminster Choir College in New Jersey. As a personal note, my mother attended Mansfield State Teachers College, and she started the semester after George Lynn transferred. Of those years at the choir college, 1934 through 38, George Lynn made some lifelong friends, such as James Barry, Ray Lundquist, Roy, and Joanna Harris. His most significant recollection, in his own words, was of his composition teacher. Quote, when I was an undergraduate at Westminster Choir College, my professor of composition was Roy Harris. My studies with this composer, who represented the forefront of American national music in the 1930s, unlocked the imagination and intuition needed to find my own identity as a composer, end quote. It was out of those studies with Roy Harris that Hem and Haw, 7 rounds and a coda, was composed. It was written for unaccompanied 4-part chorus of mixed voices. The piece, set to a satirical poem of Bliss Carman, had each quatrain of the poetry set in a different mode and then presented in round form. This received the 2nd prize at the 1939-1940 World's Fair in New York, certainly an affirmation of his own ability as a composer. Also at that time, George Lynn maintained the position of organist and choir director from 1937 to 1940 at the First Presbyterian Church in Upper Montclair, New Jersey, which is where his first piano sonata premiered in May 1939, just 4 months before Hitler invaded Poland. In 1940, Lynn accepted a higher profile church position as director of a large choral program at Pasadena Methodist Church. So he moved to California. In California, inspiration compelled him to write his first major composition, his setting of the Gettysburg Address. And this would eventually be performed by several major symphonies. including the Philadelphia Orchestra and the American Symphony under the baton of Leopold Stokowski. Now here is the powerful inspiration for this work in the composer's own voice.
One of Dr. Lynn's most striking compositions is his setting of Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address. The composer discusses the genesis of this work.
Let me tell you a little bit about it. I was in Pasadena before the Second War as a church musician. And I was called to the city auditorium one day to conduct the Star Spangled Banner there was some kind of a city meeting that afternoon. And on the stage was a curious collection of people. Carrie Jacobs Bond, who wrote When You Come to the End of a Perfect Day, and the King's Men, which was a great radio quartet of those days, who was brought over from Hollywood to sing it to her, and so on, among which was a man who, very, very old, he hobbled to the podium and said to us, "I am now going to recite the Gettysburg Address as nearly as I can remember hearing Mr. Lincoln say it." Now, that gave me quite a start. That here was a man who had actually seen and heard Lincoln. He had been a drummer boy in the Northern Army at Gettysburg. This was about 1940. He was very old, maybe 90. And it affected me, and I went right home and I made a setting of this for chorus and baritone, piano and organ, which of course was an easy orchestration after that. And then the piece has been done by the American Symphony, the Air Forces Symphony, the Philadelphia Orchestra. Oh, I don't know, many orchestras. It's been on the Voice of America twice.
His choral piece, Hem and Haw, from 1939, was at last in print in 1941, published by G. Schirmer, the same year the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor. As World War II weighed heavily on America's collective mind, George Lynn decided to enlist in the Navy in 1943 while living and working in Pasadena. However, a day or two before the Army had assigned him, before the Navy papers came through, he was instead drafted into the Army. And he was assigned to Camp Ruger in Muskogee, Oklahoma, where he served in the 42nd Artillery Division and naturally started an Army choir. That same division was deployed to the European theater. My husband and I both remember Dr. Lynn telling this story, as I'm sure many of his students can recall. When their unit arrived at Berchtesgaden, after Hitler fled, he described how he sat down at Hitler's piano, using his meat hooks to play Irving Berlin's God Bless America as loudly as he could, so that he might break a piano string, knowing full well that Irving Berlin was an American patriot and Jewish. After World War II, he returned to New Jersey for the graduate program at Princeton University. He studied composition with Randall Thompson and was choir director of the First Presbyterian Church in Princeton at that same time. Some years later, he was inspired to write Precepts, 1978, dedicated to Randall Thompson, teacher, friend. Listen as I read some of the movement titles. It's like a list of tenets that define Lynn's and Thompson's intellectual relationship. And I believe the introspective authors must also be very significant. He shall take holiness, text taken from the Bible's Wisdom of Solomon. Things we cherish most, taken from 19th century philosopher William James's writings. The Perfection of the Soul, text by Miguel de Molino, 17th century Spanish mystic. Narrow is the mansion of my soul, words by St. Augustine. What are the servants of the Lord, by St. Francis of Assisi. So he set all of these pieces to music. Also dedicated to Thompson's memory was a chamber music piece Elegy for Strings, 1984, composed the month Thompson died. After earning his MFA in 1947, Lynn joined the faculty of the Westminster Choir College as a voice teacher, conductor of the Westminster Chapter Choir, and the head of conducting department. Several fine choral pieces were arranged for the Westminster Choir in 1949 during that time while he was on faculty. Lonesome Valley, many of us have sung these, and O Magnify the Lord with Me. Next, George Lynn was offered the position of visiting professor at the University of Colorado in 1950 as an interim for Warner Imig, conducting both university and modern choirs, so he left New Jersey for Colorado. Colorado represented fond times spent during several summer music academies in Colorado Springs, when Roy Harris would invite his students to take a room at their summer house in the Springs. It was a Roy Harris salon, if you will, one that included George Lynn, Ray Lundquist, Cecil Effinger, Joanna Harris, of course Roy Harris, and Norman Lockwood. Now, and here's where it gets fun. Around the same time, Lucile Miller moved to Colorado from Philadelphia with her mother and sister to be nearer to the grandparents Miller, who lived in Brush, Colorado. Lucile and George met as soloists, Saint Teresa and Saint Ignatius, for the concert staging of Four Saints in 3 acts, with Virgil Thompson conducting at the Colorado College Summer Music Academy. And apparently, during rehearsal, Mr. Thompson kept losing his place in his own score, and he became very frustrated. Additionally, the baritone soloist was quite nervous, that would be George Lynn, having to portray St. Ignatius and sing the big Act 3 aria, Pigeons on the Grass, Alas. Lucile, infinitely wiser than her years, thoughtfully helped Mr. Thompson stay organized by providing paper clips so that he could clip the pages of his score and not lose his place. And in turn, calmly encouraged St. Ignatius. She became the true saint of this opera, having endeared herself to both men, and she and George Lynn married in 1952. One of Dr. Lynn's early choral dedications was entitled Ode, which was composed in 1951 while teaching at CU. It was written for the celebration of the 75th anniversary of the University of Colorado in Boulder, and it was dedicated to the festival chorus Burton Coffin, conductor. Also in 1951, Lynn became the organist and choir director at Denver's First Baptist Church, where his choral singers included Mildred Coffin, soprano, Lucile Miller, contralto, and Burton Coffin, baritone. It's also worth noting that several of his devoted voice students during this period, some of whom followed him from CU's modern choir to First Baptist Choir to the George Lynn Singers and various other choral groups, included sopranos Martha Updike, Madeline Roberts, alto Lorraine Hoskin, tenor Robert Carl, and bass James Gentry, my father. The George Lynn Singers formed in 1953 and often gave concerts at Denver's Phipps Auditorium in City Park. The group started with 16 singers, and within 5 years it had grown to 50. As examples of their performances, in 1957, they presented an Americana program of pieces arranged entirely by George Lynn and Norman Lockwood, which saved the group a lot of money. I mean, having the in-house composer arrangers right there. And indeed, out of that collaboration came the L&L, Lynn and Lockwood Publication Choral Series. In 1958, the George Lynn Singers performed as the chorus for Wagner's Flying Dutchman at the Denver Businessmen's Symphony, Dr. Antonia Brico conducting. In 1959, excerpts from Mussorgsky's Boris Godunov with the Denver Symphony, Saul Caston conducting, George London soloist. As a freelance musician, there's the occasional surprise call. So with a 6-hour notice, George Lynn successfully stepped in to accompany Metropolitan Opera contralto Elena Nicolaidi on her 1954 Western concert tour when her pianist suddenly developed pneumonia. And from this one experience, Lynn and Nikolaidi forged a lifelong friendship. They kept in touch for years, referring students to each other and collaborating on various projects. For more than a decade, George Lynn maintained a vibrant presence in the Denver music scene. For instance, collaborations with Saul Caston conducting an intimate coffee chat with the composers concert of contemporary music, and that was in 1955, where the Denver Symphony featured works by Schoenberg, Lynn, Daniel Moe, who's another Denver composer, and Henry Cowell. That's such a great lineup. Another concert program in February 1958 with the Musicians Society of Denver featured instrumental music by Virgil Thompson, Aaron Copland, Paul Nordoff, and George Lynn. And all this while, he was a huge part of the Denver church music scene as well, moving as organist choir director from First Baptist to Bonnie Bray Baptist to Temple Emmanuel, St. Thomas Episcopal, First Plymouth Congregational. And here are some of the sacred pieces written or arranged for choir and published, mostly by Presser during this Colorado phase. Tread Them Troubles Down in 1953, Crucifixion in 54, that was dedicated to Madeline Roberts, one of his singers and the George Lynn singers. Come to the Savior, Make No Delay in 56, dedicated to my mother. I Waited Patiently for the Lord. Kalmar, which was composed for dedication of the new sanctuary of Augustana Lutheran Church in Denver. A Sacred Symphony, which was commissioned by Ken Davis at Harding College. Then Sacred Symphony No. 2, commissioned and dedicated to the choir of the Southwest Texas State Teachers College. And then there's a Sacred Symphony 3 as well in 61. Kenneth Davis commissioned George Lynn to write numerous choral works, starting in 1958. And it was Davis who nominated Lynn for his 1959 honorary Doctorate of Laws degree from Harding College in Searcy, Arkansas. Davis was also a World War II veteran, had participated in Marine operations, including the Marshall Islands, Iwo Jima, Saipan, and he was gravely wounded. And after the war, he enrolled in the graduate program at Westminster Choir College in 1948, and that's where he met George Lynn. So with Davis's long and successful career at Harding College, his groups were not only commissioning works by George Lynn, they were recording works in the 50s, which was very progressive. And his choirs toured nationally and internationally with the USO. Lynn wrote the Choir Loft Choral Book, an Easter cantata in 1957. It was dedicated to Dr. James Francis Cook. Now, Cook was an accomplished pianist, voice teacher, composer, author, theorist, fellow member of ASCAP, and president of Theodore Presser Publishing. He was also the editor of Etude magazine from 1907 to 1950. This was a busy man. George Lynn had several of his pieces of music published in Etude, as they did often, as well as his review of the 1956 world premiere of the portrait of, or the Ballad of Baby Doe at Central City Opera. As a sidebar, I have no doubt that he wrote another piece. It's a large choral piece called Colorado Ballads. The next, like 1958, it was published. And it is based on Poet Laureate's poetry from Colorado, and her husband was a miner. So I really feel he must have been, delving into mining lore and poetry and whatnot during this time. So, okay, but back to the Etude. I laugh when I remember Dr. Lynn saying to me and others that Santa Fe Opera's 1974 production of Alvin Berg's Lulu was a Lulu. So I was really delighted when I read his excerpt from his 1956 review. So let me read this to you. And those of you who know Dr. Lynn will get a kick out of this. Quote, Tabor's social ostracism is followed by an economic denouement, with Tabor ending his life in rags again. Baby Doe remained at his side, and after his death maintains an irrational 30-year vigil at a worthless mine. In 1963, George Lynn founded Golden Music Publishers to publish and promote well-crafted choral music. And one of the first pieces he published was Sing Unto the Lord, which you will hear on Thursday evening's choral concert in Grusin. That same year, when the Lynn family moved from Colorado to Princeton, New Jersey, Dr. Lynn's responsibilities changed dramatically. So in his own words, he describes this time of his career, quote, "In 1963, I returned to the faculty of Westminster Choir College to become its music director the following year. In 1965, I was awarded a citation of merit by the college. During the 6 years that I conducted Westminster Choir, we were managed by Columbia Artists Management, traveled throughout the United States. The choir also appeared in concert at the White House. Additionally, I prepared the symphonic choir and major choral and orchestral repertoire performances with Stokowski, Bernstein, Ormandy, Beccarian, Steinberg, Malcolm Sargent, Shershin, Tivat, Bliss, Wallenstein. It was difficult to keep time free for composition, with classes to teach, choir rehearsals, touring, administration. So by 1969, the need to reduce my commitments led me to return to Colorado and allow myself a year for composition before reestablishing my freelance career of teaching and church work." There were very few pieces composed, relatively speaking, during the 60s. However, one was Alleluia in 1966, written for Eve Ely, conductor of the Scottsbluff High School Concert Choir, and that was to perform at a convention. Another was Canticle of Gratitude in 67, which was dedicated to the Oratorio Society of Germantown. Robert Carwithen was a faculty colleague of George Lynn's at the Choir College. The Lynn family then moved back to Colorado, settling in Golden in the early 70s. And at getting reestablished in the Denver area, Dr. Lynn accepted faculty positions at both Loretto Heights College and Colorado School of Mines. Should I keep that up too? He had an active student choir and voice students on both campuses, and he taught composition, arranging, and conducting at Loretto as well. Dr. Lynn composed many piano pieces. Of all the pieces he composed for quartets and piano and voice and choirs, a lot of piano pieces that he wrote that were very difficult were actually dedicated to Kathleen Joyner, a friend and colleague who taught at Loretto Heights College. Kathleen Joyner was a pianist for the Denver Symphony for many years, while her husband, Richard Joyner, was their first chair clarinet with the Denver Symphony. So the Joyners were a bit of a power music couple in Denver. Kathleen with degrees from Colorado College and Dick with degrees from Eastman. Dick joined the United States Marine Band, the President's Own. As principal clarinetist when drafted in '41, he played for both FDR's 4th inauguration and for his funeral. After World War II and a short stint with Baltimore Symphony, he accepted the principal contract in Denver and moved to Denver and met Kathleen and married her. Among the many pieces composed for and dedicated to Kathleen and Richard Joyner are Catalina for clarinet and piano, Reminiscences with folk tunes, and then Dr. Lynn specifically wrote a concert piece for clarinet and string orchestra for Dick Joyner in 1970. While Mrs. Joyner taught piano at Loretto Heights, Mr. Joyner taught clarinet at University of Denver and the University of Colorado. With young people in mind, he composed a number of pieces for Tina. One was 3 Ideas for a Young Pianist in 1965, dedicated to Tina from Daddy. And he wrote several other pieces for her. But Toccata No. 2 in 1974 was written for Adele DiGiulio, who was the daughter of Max DiGiulio. Max and George were close colleagues at Loretto Heights College in the 70s and 80s. And both Max and George would often have lunch on campus with another faculty member, Colonel Frank Kelly, you know, the man that John Wayne portrayed in the Green Berets. That was our campus. It was pretty amazing. You didn't know whether to sit down or stand at attention at lunch. Now let me just take a moment to explain that Max, as he was known to all, was a prolific composer, arranger, and conductor, beloved, bigger-than-life character, who through the years conducted for President Eisenhower, He conducted concerts with Rosemary Clooney, Bob Hope, Pearlie Ray, Jack Benny, Jimmy Durante. He collaborated with the Glenn Miller Orchestra as well as with Henry Hank Mancini, as he referred to him during World War II. Another World War II veteran and a Pennsylvanian, Max was born in Philadelphia. He enlisted in the Army Air Force Band as a trumpeter and then settled in Denver after the war and was the head of the Fine Arts Department at Loretto Heights College for 30 years. There were several pieces composed for students during this time as primarily educational illustrations between influence and imitation. Most often, words and text moved George Lynn to compose, always with an aim to educate. But in the case of Ghost Ranch in New Mexico, it was beautiful scenery and serene setting that inspired. Pedernal, a narrow mesa in north-central New Mexico, south of Abiquiu Lake in the Santa Fe National Forest, is one of the many scenic landmarks surrounding Ghost Ranch. This sacred Indian land was inspiration for Dr. Lynn's Pedernal Poem for Piano in 1979, which he wrote 3 days after the end of the final 10th Ghost Ranch workshop. My husband and I first met at Ghost Ranch that summer. Ghost Ranch was and still is a wonderful and reflective place. George O'Keeffe was inspired by these same views. Dr. Lynn harmonized Kumbaya, dedicated to Ghost Ranch, for one of the first summer workshops, and then he composed his Psalm 121, dedicated to Ghost Ranch, the final year of the workshop. And the last piece is very difficult and complex harmonics. So more substantial large core works were written in the 1980s. Cummings for chorus in 1981 was written for the Chamber Choir of Grand Rapids, Larry Beiser, conductor, based on the poetry of E.E. Cummings. Ray Lundquist, another choir college student of Roy Harris's, was one of George Lynn's closest friends. Ray had a prodigious command of the piano and of the keyboard, and if you go to Thursday's concert, you will hear his Johnny's Gone Marching, which is an amazing piano accompaniment where the piano is really the same, equal to the choir. Dr. Lynn was also commissioned to compose a choral piece for the Myers Park Baptist Church in Charlotte, North Carolina. He used sermon texts by first 3 ministers of the church, George Heaton, Carlisle Marney, and Eugene Owens. This was completed in 1986. The Reverend Carlisle Marney, considered by some to be a legend among American preachers in the latter 20th century, ahead of his time in confronting issues of race and Christian ethics. And in that way, too, Dr. Lynn was ahead of his time, and he chose 4 of the 7 movements in his choral piece to feature text from Marney's sermons, thus capturing the spirit of the civil rights era. Another piece that was used, it was written in 1986, it was based on sermons of J. Ernest Somerville, who's a senior pastor at First Presbyterian Church in Philadelphia. And the piece is called The Scandal of Christ. The movements read like this. It's very poignant. The scandal of Christ, the scandal of Nazareth, the scandal of bad company, the scandal of bad behavior, the scandal of the tree, the scandal of a crown, the scandal of broken bread, the scandal of Easter. That premiered in 1986, First Presbyterian Church of Philadelphia, with Thomas Jaber conducting. You see, George Lynn found inspiration in profound poetry, texts from the Bible, inspired mentors, moving sermons, historic events, and talented people, and the beautiful scenery of the Western United States. He did not require a commission to create music, but he required intellectual inspiration. The symphony conductors for whom he prepared choirs reads like a who's who of the greats, including Leopold Stokowski, Eugene Ormandy, Sir Arthur Bliss, Leonard Bernstein, Herbert von Karajan, Nicholas Harsanyi, Sir Malcolm Sargent, Hermann Schershen, Victor Tiva, and Saul Caston. George Lynn had a lifelong friendship with Hall Johnson, and he arranged many spirituals for mixed chorus and used spirituals as a staple in his voice instruction. He was colorblind before the term was invented. His compositional output is huge, and many pieces were written for or dedicated to a wide variety of friends and family, acquaintances, and luminaries. He even dedicated pieces to the memory of Jackie Gleason and Fred Astaire. Of Roy Harris, Ray Lundquist, Cecil Effinger, Norman Lockwood, Max DiGiulio, Frank Kelly, Kenneth Davis, James Barry, and Richard Joyner. It's a stunning list of a connection of how many of George Lynn's closest friends and musician colleagues saw active military service. Quite a few of the American composers with whom he studied or collaborated studied with Nadia Boulanger. That includes Virgil Thompson, Roy Harris, Cecil Effinger, Randall Thompson, Norman Lockwood, and Leo Craft. But of course, many of them found a blend of correctly produced differences in Colorado. Thank you.